and Happy New Year. I'm Anna and I'm delighted to introduce you to the first of our 9-part Circular Economy event series. It's great to have so many of you joining us today. We've had an overwhelming interest for this event, which is sold out with more sign-ups on Eventbrite than any previous ACAN event. So we're really looking forward to what the series has in store. Before we get started, some house rules. The meeting is being recorded, so to avoid any background noise, microphones will be kept muted. If you have any questions for our speakers, please type your name and your question in the chat box and we'll come to them at the end. So firstly, a quick introduction to ACAN and what we're all about for any newcomers who haven't met us before. ACAN is a network of individuals within architecture and related built environment professions taking action to address the twin crises of climate and ecological breakdown. We have 3 overarching aims: decarbonize now, ecological regeneration, and cultural transformation. Our rapidly growing network is formed of a number of thematic groups, including circular economy, hosting today's event, education, embodied carbon, existing buildings, carbon literacy, planning policy, professional standards, and where the wild things aren't. We're an energetic bunch who actively work together to create change, and we do that through movement building, campaigning, political lobbying, direct action, public engagement, research, and knowledge sharing. For many months now, ACAN Circular Economy Group have been analysing and agonising over how circular economy principles can be applied to the UK construction industry. The circular economy is an extremely broad topic, so we've broken it down to look at the key challenges and opportunities that fall within each of the REBA stages. We found experts from across the industry to dig down into the nitty-gritty of how to really incorporate circularity in a meaningful way at each REBA stage. Those of you paying attention will have noticed that there are only 8 REBA stages from stage 0 through to stage 7, but we're hosting 9 events. We will be using the last event of the series to close the circle, identify the gaps and opportunities highlighted in the previous stages, and collectively imagine a new stage 8 for demolition and reuse. So kicking off the series today, we have Duncan Baker-Brown, who is a practicing architect, academic and environmental activist. Author of the Reuse Atlas, a designer's guide towards a circular economy, he has practiced, researched and taught around the issues of sustainable development and closed loop systems for more than 25 years. He recently founded Baker-Brown, an architecture practice and consultancy created to address the huge demands presented by the climate and ecological emergency, as well as the challenges of designing in a post-COVID world. Over the years, Duncan's practices have won numerous accolades, including REBA National Awards and a special award for the Stephen Lawrence Prize for the Brighton Waste House. The prize money from this has since been used to set up a student prize for circular closed-loop design at the University of Brighton, where Duncan teaches. Duncan will be joined by Richard Boyd. Richard joined ARUP as a structural engineer in multidisciplinary design teams. After 4 years of building design and construction experience in the UK, Middle East and South Asia, his focus on embodied carbon led him to specialise in environmental impacts of construction products and supply chains. This work includes completing greenhouse gas emission calculations for products, construction projects, cities and economic sectors, comparative sustainability studies for construction supply chain businesses, the design and implementation of carbon management processes, and the use of circular economy principles as a set of tools and inspiration for reducing the emissions impact of the sector. He manages ARUP's global partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and has led research projects on circular economy with them, as well as with academic institutions, including UCL and ETHZ. Duncan and Richard will be discussing how architects and design teams can make the case for circularity when defining strategic briefs at stage 0. So that all of these events can be easily digested with your lunch, we aim to keep them down to within 50 minutes each. Today, Duncan and Richard will give 15-minute presentations, which will be followed by the opportunity to ask them questions. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Duncan Baker-Brown.
Thank you, Anna. I just wanted to start by saying what an honour it is to be involved with this event, and it's so exciting that so many people have joined us. I've been a huge fan of ACAN since its formation, and these are exciting times. And I'm also a great fan of Richard, who's the co-speaker. What's exciting is we've got some really top-notch speakers over the next 9 sessions. I've got no time to wait, actually, so I just need to double check that you can all see my screen. Play from start. Okay. Is that okay, Anna?
Yeah.
Okay. So, great. Okay. We currently exist as a linear economy, and I just thought I'd be the first and maybe last person to mention this, but yeah, where we take, make, and throw away. No other natural system works like this. Waste from one ecosystem is a resource from another. We're the only people that or the only system that rocks up at a place, consumes away, trashes it, and moves on, leaving devastation. What we want to be talking about is a circular economy. And in the sort of human-focused circular economy, you've got the biosphere for all organic things where you grow stuff, you make stuff out of that grown stuff, you use it, you reuse it, and as long as you don't make it toxic waste, it becomes literally compost for more organic things to grow. And then we've got the complexities of the tech sphere, where a lot of obviously the things that we make, the products we make, cannot ever be compost. So that's the big challenge, designing things to be material stores for the future, material resources for the future. This has been written about very eloquently by Michael Braungart and William McDonough in Cradle to Cradle, all about doing good, not less bad. And that's a reference to sustainability, where unfortunately the phrase has been besmirched because it tends to be, I will be less bad by 10%. I will reduce my consumption of something by 10%. That's not going to save us. So some of the obstacles preventing a mass take-up of circular principles, a lack of awareness of the benefits of what it is, no time to learn new ways. We just want to get on, we've got to build, haven't we? Not knowing where to start, and we're not always involved from the start, we being consultants. I think we're about here at the moment. You know, can we afford to do something about this problem? Or are we going to carry on as we were? And there's plenty of cartoons out there on social media, but you know, this is the sort of thing that scares a lot of us. And of course, there's no vaccine for the climate emergency. It's not going away. But saying that, within the context of the environment we're in, it has been a very interesting time, not least because of the work Greta's done, but also the fact that our parliament has declared a climate and ecological emergency, and it's enshrined in law, and lots of networks are formed, including this amazing one that we're with today. So 2019 was the year that 90% of UK local authorities and regions committed to being net zero carbon by 2030. That's a huge challenge, but that's also 60 million people in the UK. It's 114 million people around the world that live in regions that have declared a climate and ecological emergency. So why us then in the construction industry? Well, the construction sector consumes 50% of raw materials mined and harvested annually, and is responsible for nearly half of CO2 emissions. In the UK, we consume 600 million tons of products a year, UK citizens that is. The UK generates about 200 million tons of waste a year, and the construction industry is responsible for 60% of that. That's 120 million tons of stuff being thrown away. So we need to learn how to manage planet Earth's resources. And it's often designers and constructors who do that, whether we understand we do or not. So how do we sell these ideas to clients, to design teams, to the whole construction industry? Well, since 2010, the industry has nearly halved the amount of waste it sends to landfill incineration. So some things are positive. RAP estimates that nearly 20% of the construction industry is already a circular economy. But for that, what it really means is we recycle a bit now. It's not reuse, which is the bigger deal. And some people have a plan. And here we go. You know, there's a circular economy route map for London. London has a London plan. The London plan's on hold at the moment. But Brighton and Hove, we've been working with the city there. They have a circular economy route map that is going to be published next month. That's for the construction sector, because they realize what a big deal it is. And as a consultant, I've helped write this brief for the world's largest existing wrought iron structure, which is 820 meters long. And this is Madeira Terrace in Brighton. Maybe not such a big deal. They're refurbishing this structure. They're building under it as well. But in the sort of terms and conditions of the appointment for the design team, we were able to fold in the little issue about circular economy and making sure that those constraints and definitions are part of the way that design team practices on that project. So it's we're already having an impact. And of course, we've got the climate challenge from the RIBA. We've got the amazing work of Letty and a sort of carbon descent plan. So we've got a consensus out there, you could argue. We've got these networks. We've got the climate framework with this cross-industry action group initiative, which is looking at the curriculum as academic world as well as that of practice across disciplines. We're sharing knowledge and we're working together, and we were not doing that 2 years ago. People are writing about it. It's not going away. Reuse is the big deal, and that's part of a circular economy. And of course, 80% of today's built environment will be with us will be with us in 2050, which is when we need to be at net zero carbon. So why is it a big deal to start at RIBA work stage 0 strategic definition? Well, as Sophie Thomas said a number of years ago when working for the RSA, research has shown that over 80% of the environmental impact of products we use. Sorry, I can't see the quote because of the way I'm looking at this. People's faces are in the way. You can see what Sophie says. You've got to do it right at the beginning, or it's too late. It's very difficult if you don't get these ideas imbued and embedded in the beginning. So some circular economy principles in practice. I love this slide because it's Brighton where I live and it's got the word hope across it. But basically most of us now, over 80% of the population of the UK live in cities, over 50% of the world's population live in cities. It's where stuff flows in and out at the moment in a linear way. But when we get our act together, we'll turn some of those flows back on themselves to create circular economies. So in the world of a circular economy, cities are material stores for the future. We are urban miners searching for new material sources to reduce our need for natural raw materials. We've got concepts such as buildings as material banks, but you've also got EBAM, which is existing buildings as material banks. We do not need to throw anything away. We adapt what we've got. We're beginning to get the digital tools and databases to support this. Superuse has famously started their interactive harvest mapping. This is in the Netherlands. This is one of their own harvest maps. They're scouting around looking for resources, which can also be human resources. And here's a recent building of theirs, an abandoned building at an airport. No great shakes really, but they're refurbishing it. What was interesting is they found 1,000 of these nasty UPVC windows being stripped out of a housing estate. They've actually found a company that will strip those back, clean them up, and they've been installed in this building. So there's all sorts of things happening. They can get a disused single-story building, and this is a building that was on a school site, and with children, they made a 3D model of that building, which deconstructed the elements, and then the kids put it back together in a different way. There you've got it. So that was a nice way of engaging with kids. This is a digital 3D resource map of the Greater Amsterdam Metropolitan District. So actually quantifying the potential resources in an area for reuse. Here we've got Elmer Dermschwitz, who again, she's an architect in the Netherlands, who has got a Revit bolt-on that actually sort of measures the potential for reuse of building elements in an existing building. MyROG, the major infrastructure resource group, last year prepared a paper presenting a case for a resource exchange mechanism. We've got an emergence of an idea here. So we've also got the physical infrastructure. Is Rota, famously deconstructing buildings. Now I'm not in control of my slides for some reason. And they're deconstructing the World Trade Center there. And here they've got their own warehouses that are collecting the resource and their own shop. They've also got their own digital resource as well. But we do need the physical as well as the digital. We're working with them on a research project at the moment, which will provide a directory of 1,500 reuse suppliers across 6 European countries. And I'm hosting a digital, it was postponed last year, but it's going to happen this year, Digital School of Reconstruction this year. If you want to be involved, get in touch. What we're talking about is minding the Anthropocene, reworking, reusing the stuff that we've already processed, we as humans. If we do that, we can then major on nurturing the natural environment because we don't need to rape and pillage it for its resources. Defining the business case, I think it saves money. So here's an example, it's a very simple example. Cleveland Steel, they found a building in Ireland, they deconstructed it. They needed a new building, by the way. They deconstructed this building, they reassembled it in the UK. It's only a £6 million project. They saved £1 million by doing that on what they put aside. Here in Paris, this tower block on the left was due for demolition and being rebuilt by the mayor, had put money aside for a new tower to replace that. Lacaton and Vassal gave them their project for 2/3 of the cost by not demolishing, by adapting. We're doing the same in Brighton. Here's 3 towers in Brighton that we're going, our brief is to double the density of housing on site because Brighton is land and sea locked, but halve the carbon footprint, get the new stuff working hard for the old stuff. And here's the before and after. So designing new buildings to a circular economy. Here's a great example. It's the Circle Pavilion in Amsterdam. And the interesting thing is you've got 18 million euros of circle building there, closed loop systems for energy, water, food, and construction systems and supply chain. What was most interesting is that the client for this project, Petra Van Heel, he stood in that building with my students and I and said, the ABN AMRO Bank are not only a financial bank, we're now a materials bank. So they're understanding the value of their investing in buildings that at the end of the building's, so-called end of the building's life, is a material resource. So some principles. Remember, buildings are material stores or material banks for the future. We're looking at material passports, which is information that you can plug into BIM models that gives you additional information on the reusability and provenance of materials so you can safely reuse one day. There's leasing of materials. Richard's going to be talking more about that. Designing for disassembly, and then trying to eliminate the toxic and materials and the materials without an end-of-life strategy. So introducing more and more organic materials. Here we've got a project for Glyndebourne Pavilion that's just has been switched on again, where we're finding waste from the site. This is our own resource map for the site. We're looking at old bricks, oyster shells and lobster shells from the site, food waste, ash dieback, corks, glass, and we're growing insulation on site, mycelium insulation on site. We've got a lot of chalk on the South Downs. So we actually found most of these materials on site. That's the material palette for this building that's going on site soon. So, by the way, I wrote a book a few years ago called The Reuse Atlas. It had chapters which were sort of steps towards closed loop systems. Recycling was the first most basic thing through to closed loop systems. We're doing a rewrite. If anybody's got any projects, please contact me direct. We actually know what we're doing, so what's stopping you guys? And don't forget, architecture can matter. Our biggest challenge is not changing today. Thank you. Keep safe and keep well. I did it too quickly. I said I'd run out of slides.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Duncan. So many really interesting resources and examples in there. I have to say that I'm quite pleased that that one was recorded so that I can look back over it. Just a quick reminder to everyone, you are very welcome to put any questions you have for Duncan and Richard into the chat box. And I will quickly hand over to Richard.
Super, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Duncan. Great introduction, and nicely set up my what I'm going to share today. I'm also really excited. I think this might be the most people I've ever spoken to in one session, so that's a real proponent of sort of how exciting and how much engagement there is in this topic. So my name is Richard Boyd. I'm an engineer with ARUP in London, and I'm going to talk to you about our work with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, supported by 3XN GXN in the Netherlands, in Denmark, sorry, and RICS and JLL on making the business case for circular economy in real estate. If I just progress my slides. Just wait for my computer to catch up. This project has produced 2 publications, and I guess we can sort of share a link to them at the end. The first was called The First Steps, which identified, used a stakeholder engagement across 5 cities in Europe: Berlin, Amsterdam, Milan, Aarhus in Denmark, and London, to identify that investors and construction clients are the stakeholders in the built environment value chain best placed to take the first steps towards achieving a circular economy in our sector, but they do not have a clear vision or a clear idea of what the positive business case was. So having learnt that in first steps, we then said, well, in our second half, let us design a project where we're able to make and build a business case direct to those clients at stage 0, so at project inception, so that they understand from the beginning what the positive business case is. And that publication came out February of last year. What we did to make that business case for real estate and circular economy was to say, well, in the current system, where is waste generated? And I'm not talking about waste in the physical sense, it's that as well, but it's structural waste, it's economic waste. Where is value lost in the way that real estate currently operates? And we identified 5 areas of that waste. The first is underutilized space. Even before the pandemic, European offices were underoccupied 35 to 40% during office hours. And that's not even counting evenings and weekends. Now with working at home being our standard thing, who knows what that percentage will now be. We know that buildings are demolished prematurely. Ask a structural engineer what the design life is, they'll notionally say 60 years, but we know different systems in a building last different lengths of time, and we know that buildings are increasingly demolished after 30 years or even after 20 years. We know that even in cities with very high land values and very high demand for space and for housing, we still have vacant land. And we know that UK residential developers are seeing almost 600,000 plots with planning permission that they're not bringing forward. How do we realize more value from the land that's not currently being used? Depreciated building materials. This is what Duncan was really highlighting just now, is that at the moment, while we are recycling increasing percentages of materials, that is percentage by volume, not by value. The value part of that discussion is that only about 5% of the value of materials going into construction is currently being recovered at the moment, because we typically downcycle materials, we don't send to landfill. And underperforming components, we know that about 20 to 40% of the energy currently used in buildings could be profitably conserved with existing technology. We're just not doing it because the incentives in this value chain are not aligned. So having identified those 5 areas of waste or lost value, we've designed 5 business models or 5 concepts for applying and using circular economy principles to add value by eliminating those sources of waste. And I'm going to go through each of them now within 50 minutes. That's flexible spaces, adaptable assets, relocatable buildings, residual value, and performance procurement. So the first one, flexible spaces. In each of these cases, each of these models is new, it's innovative, hasn't been done before, but they're all based on concepts that we're already seeing changing the real estate market as we know it today. So we've seen with flexible spaces the growth of co-working, people like WeWork. We've also seen that in the more traditional market, leases are getting shorter, sort of 10 years or less now, typically. We're also seeing that some corporate organizations, this is Orange in France, are trying to merge the traditional long-term lease with the co-working concept. And that's what we sought to sort of look at. In this, another example of flexible space, an office for a marketing agency in the Netherlands, which is an office by day and an event space at night with the desks disappearing into the ceiling at the touch of a button. And we're also seeing some other consultants in the Netherlands who are saying, we do not need the same amount of space every day of the week. So how do we give that space away to other people on the days and at the times that we don't need it? So trying to make occupational spaces a lot more flexible. So we have a standard building, which is fully let, so on paper it is occupied, but we know every occupier is not occupying it fully, so there is space here that is going to waste. How do we take the demand for space, whatever it might be, startups or whatever, and match that demand to that space? At the minute, the existing landlord and anchor tenant block that demand matching process. So we propose having a new flexible space operator, someone who's able to realize value to the client, be it the anchor tenant or the landlord, by creating additional revenue streams, by renting out the space they're not using to people who need it over the short term. Adaptable assets. So we have seen increasingly reuse is on the agenda. The new Standard Hotel in London, an excellent use of changing an office building into a hotel. provided that some people don't mind not having windows in their hotel room. So some of the forms for buildings that we use constrain the way that we can adapt them to other uses. Adaptable assets, again, Midtown Manhattan, following on from the pandemic, all those offices, are they going to continue to be used as offices, or are we going to turn them into affordable housing? You know, what are the restrictions we put on buildings by designing them for a single purpose that stop them being changed into other uses? So to overcome those barriers, we say, let's split the investment strategies between the bits of the building that last a long time, the structure and the skin, the bits of the building that are function specific and short term, the services and the space plan, and say, we can occupy a building for one use for one period of time, one social moment. We can then strip it back, occupy it for a different function and a different use with a different investor for a different period of time. That means that we can respond to social change on a site without having to demolish a building. Relocatable buildings. We have seen ideas for relocatable buildings coming out of architecture practices for decades. This is the Patera building system by Hopkins from the early 80s. It was a building designed to be put up in a couple of days by no more than 3 people. It could be deconstructed, it can be relocated. It didn't take off. For the Olympics and for sports events, this is Wilkinson Ayres basketball arena for London 2012. We have demountable, deconstructible building systems, but are they fully relocatable? This is function specific again. Its adaptability is limited. And for festivals, imagine, can anyone remember what a festival looked like? Seems a long time ago. The co-op has a supermarket that they send to festivals. This is at Glastonbury. They put it up for the festival. It's a shop for that period of time. They take it down, they move it to the next one. So we have these concepts relocated, and of course, shipping containers. You can't talk about relocatable buildings without talking about someone making something out of shipping containers. But typically, this leads to quite constrained architectural space. So not only does it restrict your design freedom, but it also restricts the business case because you can only get so much rent for these types of buildings. So how do we take the concept in circular economy of design for deconstruction, buildings that can be taken down and put back up again without damaging the materials, to create buildings that command permanent building type rents, but are also temporary? So we've imagined, or we envisage, the creation of a new relocatable building portfolio operator, someone who owns a series of buildings that are designed for deconstruction but feel permanent, that they can then deploy onto the vacant plots in cities. So while the longer term process of getting a regeneration project goes, like, trundles on, and in the UK it can take decades, we can still eliminate the sort of the blight, the social blight, the economic blight associated with these vacant plots by putting buildings onto them in the short term. And these buildings then generate value, they generate activity, they generate purpose in that meanwhile sense, but they're able to be moved to sort of overcome the barriers associated with waste and cost that a traditional method of construction would create. Residual value. So this is where we're sort of really talking about, at stage 0, how do you get a developer and an investor to agree to pay the additional money it takes to make a building deconstructible so the materials can be recovered at their end of life. At the minute, it does cost more. So you've got to make that business case at the beginning to say, this is why it costs, it's worth spending more. At the minute, there are, of course, systems for recovering value. I talked about downcycling. We tend to crush stuff up and use it under roads. Not a particularly good way of capturing residual value. This is an image from Rotor. Duncan's already mentioned them. They go in and salvage the high value finished materials, typically in sanitary ware, things like that, from office buildings across the Benelux countries in northern France. And in London, we're seeing elements of it. This is an ARUP project with British Land, where we took the outer skin of a facade, several thousand square meters of it, off a 20-year-old building, set up a pop-up factory in East London, cleaned them, replaced the gaskets, put them back on the building for another 20, 30, 40 years. So the glazing's reused, the aluminium is reused. So that's high value reuse. But to really incentivize this, we need to make it systematic and systemic. So we said, let's create a new financial product, which the value, it's a contract, the value of which is connected to the future value of the materials in that building. And the developer sells that product. And the product is attached to a materials passport, and it's capturing the financial essence of that building's material bank point that Duncan made. They sell that product at the beginning, they raise the money they need to pay for deconstruction through that sale. That contract is then traded on an exchange, just like any other financial product would, throughout the life of the building. And at the moment the materials covered by that contract come out, The person who owns the contract at the moment is the owner of those materials, and they are able to realize the future value of those materials. And we know, or we can expect, we can anticipate that as our resources become more constrained, prices of materials are going to continue to go up. And we've already seen that over the past decade. So the materials that go into buildings now will be more valuable in the future than they are now. And so this really creates an opportunity to generate value and pay for that deconstruction process. And if there's a contractual obligation to reuse the material or make it available for reuse, it's much less likely that a demolition contractor will have the freedom to dispose of it in the way that it's currently done. Final model is performance procurement. So again, I mentioned at the top that buildings do not perform the way that they are designed to from an energy sense, because the incentives between the designers and the commissioners and the installers and the maintainers are not the same. So performance procurement is all about sort of paying for what you need. It's product as a service. Again, Duncan mentioned that before as well. Product as a service. Instead of buying products, I'm going to pay for subscriptions. I don't own a car. I'm a member of Zipcar. I'm paying for the service of personal mobility without having to take on the responsibilities of servicing, MOTing, finding parking for, insuring a car. So this, applying that concept to the built environment, Signify, the formerly known as Philips Lighting, already have a mature procurement contract for buying lighting as a service. I don't buy light bulbs, I pay for the service of lighting. In Singapore, KR is doing air conditioning as a service, or HVAC as a service. They provide chilled water. They'll take over any system you have in your building. They will operate it remotely using IoT and optimize that, and you just pay for the chilled water that you use. Mitsubishi in the Netherlands, I've forgotten the exact percentage, but a decent percentage of the lifts they are now installing into buildings in the Netherlands are now under this M-use concept, where Mitsubishi retain ownership of the elevators, and the person who owns the building, who occupies the building, pays every time they use them. So we take this performance procurement model, we take the service providers, and we focused here on the skin, the envelope, the space plan, and the services, the bits of the building that are determining the energy use. We use IoT and digital to monitor the performance of those systems in real time. And the contract states that the client or the occupant will only pay when the performance is met. So there's a pay and gain sharing arrangement that says, when the building does not perform as it should do, I will pay less. And if you make it perform better than it should do, the supplier gets to keep the savings from the energy use. And that incentivizes everybody to make sure the system is properly commissioned, designed to work well over the long term, and is designed to minimize energy use throughout the life. For each of these 5 models, we took confidential commercial information from 5 real projects across our 5 cities. And we built discounted cash flow models for each of them. So we started off with the linear base case, what's understood for now. This is the London example where we applied performance procurement, was a build to rent project in London. We said, this is the cash flow over 30 years for the standard case. This is the cash flow for the circular economy case. All those maintenance costs have turned into one single subscription payment. And we calculated the difference in return on investment between the linear case and the circular economy case. So for flexible spaces, we applied that model to a tenanted commercial building in Milan and found that over 12 years, it reduced the cost of that space by 18% to the tenant. Nearly 20% of the cost of taking that space was reduced because they were able to make the desks they weren't using available to others. Adaptable assets, taking a long-term view over 50 years, making an asset adaptable and able to respond and change use as social demands change, improves the return on investment by 3% over 50 years. For relocatable buildings, 26% is a pretty big improvement in rate of return. That's because we didn't include land use costs because they're too variable. But that 26% gives the window of profit, the window of cost that the relocatable building operator can use to pay for the land they need that's otherwise going to be derelict. Residual value, 5% reduction in a fit out for some tenanted retail in Berlin over a 10-year fit out cycle. Given contractors work on a 2 or 3% profit margin, this is a pretty good improvement on that return. And finally, performance procurement, again, a long-term thing over 30 years, we were able to demonstrate a 3% improvement in internal rate of return by improving the performance of that building by incentivizing everybody to make sure it's optimized. So that's it for me, 15 minutes, and I'm really excited and interested to hear what questions we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was really, really inspiring and thought-provoking. I'm sure that I think we've got wide agreement with that, because there's a lot of questions popping up in the chat. So jump straight into them. First question from Kieran Walker. I think this is directed to both of you, but Duncan, if you want to take this one first. How can these ideas be scaled in the context of the risk aversion of the construction industry, the need to specify certifiable and tested products for liability, and the requirement to safeguard procurement flexibility to ensure competition?
Ask Richard. No. No, I mean, to be serious, these things, that in my experience, there's a lot more happening in the Netherlands and France and Germany than here. So so there are large projects. What's happening, I think, is that because of the climate emergency now, and I put the COVID emergency in with that, we've got a lot of big clients and local authorities who are big clients. They're looking at doing things in a different way. So that's why I cited the Madeira Terrace contract that I helped draft, or design guide. So I think as the doors get to be pushed open, is ajar. And I think, Richard's working with pretty big commercial clients discussing these issues. So for me, I think, to be honest, we are at the point where we're talking about it, but there's a lot of people and a lot of institutions, big corporates who are wanting to know more, because we do know we've got a big problem. And a lot of people do believe that we've only got about a decade to avert a huge disaster. So a lot of people are doing the sort of work required to be able to roll this out. There are big challenges around the safety of the materials, and from the point of view of insurance, how you can guarantee the performance of stuff. But there are people out there that know what they're doing. Rota are deconstructing the World Trade Center in Brussels at the moment as part of the team. They are selling off the facade, just like Richard showed with was it the British Land Project? There are people around the world doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'll add two thoughts. The first is, by targeting stage 0 and targeting the business case for the investors and the construction clients, that our strategy for scaling it was to try and get at the very, very beginning and appeal to people's wallets. So that's our scaling strategy number 1. Our scaling strategy number 2 is, as I said, the stuff that we've come up with is quite new, and people are not going to adopt it straight away on very large development projects. So what we're looking to do next is pilot these concepts. So we want to say, let's speak to the organizations that want to lead, the clients that want to lead, and let's say, well, let's take each of those. We separated those 5 ideas out for clarity, but each project is not going to be just one of them, and any particular project will blend those ideas together, what's appropriate for the project context. Let's take a real project, let's take the appropriate blend of the ideas, let's pilot it at an appropriate scale, understanding, acknowledging from the beginning we're doing something we haven't done before, getting additional funding from innovation organizations if we need to demonstrate proof of concept to the rest of the industry. So then we can come back in 2 or 3 years to say the tenants signed up to the flexible spaces lease agreement, or we were able to create that exchange onto which we could sell that residual value futures contract, or whatever it might be. There's still a long way to go to make those sort of concepts realizable, but I think with an appropriate innovation process and with some pilots with some big players, we'll be able to demonstrate value and start to scale it from there.
There seem to be quite a few questions coming through about regulation and liability. So another one here, this is for Richard from Anna Brett's, a specific example. How did the product warranty work in the project you've shown where the glazing gaskets were replaced?
So it was a 20-year-old building that we chose to, it was One Triton Square, we chose to refurbish, not to demolish and rebuild it. Because it was only 20 years old, the original facade contractor was still around. So we were able to call them up, and they actually, I think, ended up doing the work. They originally wanted to do it in their facilities in Germany, which involved driving the facade to Germany, doing the work and bringing it back. And we said, no, let's cut down the carbon miles, let's do it in the UK. So we set up that pop-up facility. They sent their people over, and they, because it was their system and they were doing the work, they were then happy to warranty it as a new system. So the client didn't actually take any additional risk on that example than they would have done if it had been brand new.
Thank you. Question for Duncan. This is from James Cross. Any thoughts on reuse in the heritage sector? Things have been taken up and moved around, but generally this is disapproved of.
Oh, I don't know if I completely understand the question, because what I would argue is that in the heritage sector we've been reusing for decades. And so I'm maybe not understanding exactly what the question is, but yeah, I think we do need different approaches for example, you know, in Brighton, where I'm coming from, there's a large area of Brighton that's listed. And so, you know, how are you going to reduce the carbon footprint of the operational energy use of an area that's listed that you're not allowed to sort of change the look of, you know? So I just think we need different strategies. What we can learn from heritage buildings is that they are easy to adapt, and they, you know, up until 1910, when we started putting cement in the mortar mix in the UK, any brick and stone building is easily reusable. So I think heritage buildings are an example of how buildings generally are material stores, accessible material stores for the future. But I'm not talking about the wholesale deconstruction of cities. I'm talking about the sort of reuse and adaptation of a place or an individual building, or if there is a building that needs to be demolished, turn that demolition into deconstruction. So I'd actually say that, you know, in terms of the RIBA work stages, that 0H shouldn't have the demolition in it. It should say deconstruction, because that should be the sensibility. We don't need to throw stuff away.
Richard, would you like to add to that one at all?
I mean, our experience is that heritage and listing does normally drive reuse, and we've seen examples of, I mean, you can agree or disagree with it on aesthetic grounds or design grounds if you like, but, you know, taking down facades, moving them and putting them back up because they're listed or they're protected in some way or adjusted in some way. So I think heritage can be a real driver for that. I think Duncan's sort of concept of EBAMS, existing building material banks, is a real, you know, the retrofit challenge for the UK is huge, and being able to find the right compromise between protecting existing features but also achieving the sort of energy efficiency and energy use reductions that we need at scale across our sort of building stock is something that sort of probably needs thought about a little bit more.
Another really brilliant question here from Laurie Chetwood. We need a standard to be able to explain the benefits of the circular approach to uninformed clients and developers. How can we simply qualify and quantify a circular approach? Richard, if you want to take that one first, and then Duncan this time, just.
Okay, well, I think so. There are the starting point for I have a starting point where I sort of think of a nectarine model for circular economy, if you like. There's a core stone of the circular economy concept, which is really tangible and specific, and that is about waste and material reuse. And things like the reuse atlas and the waste atlas, these are like real tangible examples of using material, eliminating waste by reusing things. That's the starting point for most people's conversation or entry point in circular economy is start with waste. So if you're looking for a framework, things like the circular economy primer from GLA takes a materials focus and a waste focus, has a series of frameworks in there. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a series of frameworks for building blocks of circular economy, from business models to design to reverse logistics to policy, enabling conditions they call it, but it's essentially public policy. So those are two examples of frameworks that kind of exist for this core bit. They're kind of the soft bit, which is a lot harder to explain and a lot harder to put into a framework, but is sweeter and juicier and higher value, is this circular economy a systemic change question. So when I say the economists talk about structural waste, which is really confusing in a built environment conversation, because everyone then starts giving the structural engineers a hard time for causing all the structural waste. But the waste that's implicit in the real estate system, because it misallocates space, it does not use space well, it does not make it available to people who need to use it. It hoards it, and it hoards it in some places and over provides it in others. That real estate system creates an enormous amount of waste, and redesigning that system using circular economy principles is hard, and the work that needs to be done with real estate professionals, with people like RSAS, with planning officers, all that work that happens at stage 0 or even before stage 0, so that you're making the right decisions about what's my occupation strategy, what's my tenancy agreement look like, how am I making sure that my building fabric can change use if it needs to, and the planning system that facilitates that changing of use. I'm not sure I'm answering the question. I'm just sort of highlighting some of the considerations that need to be brought to bear and brought into the conversation to try and bring some clients on the journey as to the changes that need to be made beyond the sort of purely materials discussion.
Duncan, would you like to add to that?
Richard, I thought you were going to be really concise, but
you should be ready for that question, shouldn't I?
Look, in a circular economy, there's no such thing as waste. That's the bottom line. You design out waste. If there's a system that ends up with generating waste, then something needs to be tweaked in the system to make sure that we design out waste. I mean, I work with waste managers, and there's a Dr. Ryan Woodard said that the concept of waste was sort of invented in the UK in 1861, because we were sort of showing off how we were plundering the rest of the world with from our so-called empire, and we were able to make bricks out of brand new resources. We didn't have to make them out of rubbish. So a circular economy is an economy where you design out waste, whether that's human resources or physical resources. And it at one level it's as simple as that. At the moment, so-called hard-nosed developers are paying for 10 to 15% of what they buy to be thrown away. So for me, it's obvious if you design that out of the system, and I think we're very well placed to design out waste, then you're gonna save your clients some money in the first place. There are two different challenges though. There's trying to turn existing 20th and 21st century buildings into a circular situation, which that's where you got your problem with liabilities and performance. But if you're looking forward with new buildings, I think we're very well placed to design out waste.
Thanks, Duncan. So we did promise to keep this to within 50 minutes. So with the 2 minutes, that's actually now 1 minute remaining, maybe there's time for one more question each. So question for Duncan, could you speak quickly about any specific challenges or barriers you've come up with against building control when reusing materials?
No, I found building control really helpful. I mean, I built a really weird thing called the Brighton Waste House, and building control witnessed and certified the fire tests for cladding that building in carpet tiles. They actually performed really well. It's a controversial bit. It just happened to be the fire test thing, what with the Grenfell disaster, to talk about that. But I'm not saying we should clad buildings in carpet tiles. But what I found is them being very helpful. So yeah, I think that the big challenge is if you are going to reuse components that have guarantees, you have to do what Richard did, which is to work with the existing suppliers. But that is a big deal and a big part of where we're throwing stuff away. If it's older than that and there's no guarantees, you've got to in effect deconstruct the components into their material elements and then rebuild them again and get that guarantee.
That's really good to hear about your positive experience. I think collaboration is exactly what we need to be addressing issues like these. Richard, one final question for you. How do you envisage the architecture industry to work with the use of material passports such as those developed by PLAN?
Interesting. The AJ did a good piece on it, which is worth looking back at. Isabel Kaminsky was a really interesting piece. That's the brief answer. The slightly longer answer is material passports, at their simplest, they're a document which contains all the information you need to reuse material, which is the same as using it for the first time. So if you think of all the information you collect when you're writing your specification, all the information you ask for, and then all the information you review and approve or accept from the supply chain when it's proposed to you, all that information is the information that you need to put into your materials passport. So thinking through how the information is managed on the project so that all that information is available in 5, 10, 15 years time, that's the thought process by which to engage with material passports. And there are platforms like Madaster out there that are offering that as a service right now as well.
Great, thank you. Well, I wish we could ask all of the questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. So apologies if you asked a question we didn't get round to today. We are, however, really keen to capture the wealth of thoughts and ideas and questions that have come up in this session. So we've put together a mirror board, which we hope will provide a kind of interactive way to continue the conversation, and will also form part of our REBA Stage 8 appraisal at the end of this series. So we'd like to invite you all to collaborate on this. I believe a link has already been shared in the chat box, but if somebody could possibly share the link to that now, and you can also find it in the Eventbrite email. Also quickly just to say, as ever, please do get in touch if you'd like to hear more about or get involved with any of our current campaigns and actions. There's a particular need at the moment for volunteers to help out with our website. So if anyone here or anyone knows anyone who may be able to help with that, we'd be really glad to hear from you. And lastly, but definitely the most importantly, a big thank you to Duncan, Richard, the ACAN team behind the scenes, and all attendees today. Hope you all have a great afternoon, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone, stay safe.
Thank you, Anna. I've got to go. See you, Richard. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Duncan.